Hey everyone, you're listening to the Vent Podcast, your source for market insights, wine industry news, and updates on our current collections. Enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vent Podcast. It's Brady again, joined as always by our senior wine professional, Billy Galenko. Billy, how you doing?
Doing well. It's been a busy couple of weeks. I think you're about to touch on that, but happy to be back on the podcast.
Yeah, it has been pretty hectic around here. Billy, you were traveling in Europe, in Bordeaux. Our team was in Oregon just last week, meeting with producers, and we'll touch on a lot of that stuff in next week's episode. This week, we have a really great conversation with producer, winemaker Josh McDaniels from Bledsoe McDaniels Estates up in Walla Walla in Washington. So we'll get to that conversation here in a little bit. But aside from all of the traveling, we've also sold out 2 collections pretty recently with really different life cycles on our platform, right? We sold out our Piemonte collection, and we also sold out a recently released Lafite Rothschild vertical. The Lafite collection sold out in 58 minutes, whereas our Piemonte collection took several weeks. And I know that it's kind of interesting for investors to see the collections as they tick down, but these were both really great offerings, very different in terms of their asset profiles and the history that these collections and the wines in them have in the marketplace. But we think they're both really awesome offerings. So congrats to everyone who was able to get in.
Yeah, putting it as a understatement a little bit is Piemonte is way more like Burgundy than it is like Bordeaux. So they were definitely different offerings in that sense. And then also Bordeaux, and being Lafite and being a vertical, it's a single producer for multiple years. Very different than a collection of the top producers from another region like Piemonte. So that was really exciting that everybody was able to get in. And yeah, on the Bordeaux side of things, I was there for on Primeur tasting, basically tasting the wines of 2021, trying to get a sense of what the vintage was like. And we have a good sense of that now. And I think those of you it's kind of more of wine trade type news, but you might be seeing in the news now prices coming out for the Bordeaux wines of 2021. And they basically every year people go and taste, the industry, the trade, journalists go and trade and taste in April. And then May and June are when the prices of the previous year's vintage come out, and they're coming out as we speak. The larger chateaux tend to be more in the middle or towards the end. We're just at the very beginning of pricing, but Vince always, looking to taste them. Just like last year, we're planning on potentially having an Primeur collection. So yeah, we have our eyes on these prices, and it's really exciting time for futures. And along that, we have our own futures offering coming up. We're calling it a Vent en Primeur collection. And this is something we're really excited about. This will be out May 20th. It's featuring wines from Joy Fantastic, the 2021, I guess it will be now, last year's vintage, Syrah. Joy Fantastic is a wine brand, and the wines are made by Amy Christine, master of wine, along with her husband and industry veteran winemaker, Peter Hunken. Amy is on our advisory board, our wine advisory board, and she's been a great partner to us. And when we were coming up with the ideas, trying to do our first futures offering, we had interest from a ton of different producers. And knowing that we wanted to make sure this first futures collection was highly vetted and the wines were really well respected and really well made, we went ahead and went with Amy, because we've been working with her now for well over a year. She's been advising Vent, and we've been able to experience her wines and really know the caliber of winemaking and knowledge, being an MW brings to the wines, but also the decade plus of experience that Peter Hunken brings as well. So we're really excited for this collection, and it's featuring one of Brady's favorite grapes, Syrah, which is underappreciated, I think, in Santa Barbara, but it's the 3rd most planted grape in Santa Barbara, just behind the famous Pinot and Chardonnay. Many people don't know that, but it's one of the best wines coming out of the region.
It's exciting to be able to offer a futures collection featuring Syrah, right? Because typically when we think of futures in the wine world, we're thinking of Bordeaux and Bordeaux varietals, right? So as we continue to explore more producer relationships and have discussions about what futures offerings will look like on the Vent platform, it's kind of unique that we're going to be able to offer futures en Primeur type offerings from Europe, from the US, hopefully in the future from all over the place. So a really great opportunity for investors. We've had a lot of people asking about futures, and specifically asking about Bordeaux futures, which, as Billy said, we'll have in the future. But we should be on the lookout for more and more future type offerings as we continue to grow.
Yeah, and we'll get in next week a little bit more into the details of this offering. But what's really great about this is, Bordeaux Futures, you have to go through this purchasing process of, each chateau has a courtier who then helps them sell wines to negociants. And then from there, people like Vint or other merchants can buy the wine, which we're going right to the producer. We're getting pricing that's below current retail pricing. And we're kind of having that built-in bit of margin already for our investors, which is really exciting. And it's one of the benefits of, Vint trying to get closer and closer to the producers, being able to define these different margins and these good prices on wines wherever we can.
And futures, right? Like aren't always better or worse qualitatively investments than, maybe our typical thematic collections. But futures offerings, like Billy said, can offer a little bit more predictability and stability relative to the kinds of prices that they'll command in the future, because there is already some built-in value because you're getting it, under retail price. I think that provides an opportunity to offer a new variety of risk profiles for our collections, which I think will be really important as investors think about diversifying their portfolios, which is something that we talk a lot about in our education.
Yeah, and it's to your point there. The main thing is now we've offered quite an interesting range of offerings, whether it be whiskey, both in cask and in bottle. We had traditional Bordeaux futures. We've had regular thematic collections. And now this is just the next step in our evolution to further searching for the interesting new offerings for our investors and looking for more and more opportunities for quality investments. So this is our first, and it'll hopefully be the first of many. And we're really excited to bring this to our investors.
Yeah, now we can, kind of dive into our interview with Josh McDaniels that, as we had stated, we recorded previously. And Billy at the time was in Bordeaux during the time of this recording. But it was a great conversation with winemaker Josh McDaniels out of Walla Walla, Washington, the winemaker and on co-labels with former NFL player Drew Bledsoe. So it's Drew Bledsoe's estate out there in Walla Walla, and they now have a joint label called Bledsoe McDaniels. And so Josh is joining us to discuss their projects, discuss winemaking generally and his journey into the wine world. He's really accessible. It's a great conversation. We hope you all enjoy. Hey, Josh, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this.
This is our second conversation now, and we had a great time the last time we chatted, and there were so many projects, individual projects that you're working on along with Drew Bledsoe out in Washington State, and just wanted to hear a little bit about that. Maybe you can provide a bit of an intro for you specifically, and then maybe a little bit about the projects you're working on at Doubleback and at Bledsoe Wine Estates.
For sure, yeah. So I'm the CEO and director of winemaking for Bledsoe Wine Estates. We're based out of Walla Walla, Washington. We have 3 wineries that are all kind of roll up into the Bledsoe Wine Estates umbrella. Doubleback, which was the original brand. It's a Walla Walla state-grown Cabernet project that was started in 2007. Then 10 years later, we launched Bledsoe Family Winery, which is really just a little bit more of a casual approach to just Walla Walla wines in general. So we make rosé, we make a little Chardonnay, more Cabernet and Syrah. And then just recently, we launched a partnership between Drew and I, Bledsoe McDaniels, which is mostly a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir project that we're super excited about. So our first venture outside of the Walla Walla Valley and down into the state of Oregon, and actually heading down there tomorrow to go check out our new estate vineyard. So yeah, that's the quick and dirty of our business. And it's grown and changed and been just super fun. And we've got a great team. It's just been, a killer few years. It's been a ton of fun.
I'll hop in there. For me, I watched shows and I didn't really realize where it is in Washington. I didn't really, you don't, when you think of Washington, most people think of Seattle. Could you kind of give us a sense of where it is in the state? And then I also don't think many people know that, Drew Bledsoe played and he was on the Patriots, but he also is from Walla Walla. And you're also from Walla Walla. So can you kind of give us a sense of where it is in the state and what the climate is on that side of the state? And then, what it's like growing up there and how you got, deeper into wine.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's funny, we sell a lot of wine. We were just talking earlier. Sell a lot of wine on the East Coast, and we sometimes you get a phone call and, you say, oh, we're in Washington. And they say, oh, the capital. No, Washington State. We're in Washington State. And they go, oh, like Seattle. Doesn't it rain a lot there? How do you grow Cabernet? And so, yeah, there's those funny stigmas, especially on the East Coast, that you got to kind of break down. But basically, Walla Walla is on the southeastern corner of Washington State. And when you think about Seattle, everyone knows Seattle, thinks of dark gray, rain, lots of rain, and, the grunge music scene and all of that, which are all true. But the thing that happens, so all that coastal weather, comes in and dumps down in Seattle. Well, the Cascade Mountain Range, keeps all that weather there. So it doesn't really allow it to pass over into eastern Washington. So as an example, I think it goes from like 140 or 150 inches of annual precipitation in the Cascades. And then like within a matter of a few miles, it goes to like 4 inches. It turns into basically a desert. I don't remember the exact definition of a desert, but I think it's under like 4 or under 6 inches of annual rainfall. And it basically turns into that. And so Walla Walla, that weather basically that isn't allowed to make it over, and then anything that does make it over the range rushes east over the Columbia Valley and into Walla Walla. And we go on Walla Walla on the west side of the valley. We get about 6 inches of annual precipitation at our estate vineyard McQueen. And then all the way up into the Blue Mountains within the AVA, like where we have Cabernet grown in the Mill Creek area of Walla Walla, there's about 23 inches of annual precipitation. So it's a really cool, dynamic, diverse region where you can get a lot of different terroirs to grow different wines in, and it's just extremely fun. But yeah, it's funny to break down those stigmas attached to basically what is the Seattle culture. And, it is the big city, and there's TV shows and movies and whatnot that feature that, but it's certainly not rainy weather here in Walla Walla. It's very much hot and dry and beautiful weather most of the year. So, but yeah, Drew Bledsoe, he grew up here in Walla Walla. He, had this great football career, went number 1 overall in the 1993 NFL draft to the New England Patriots, had made a number of Pro Bowls, had some passing records, played 13 years, 9 for the Patriots, and then a few for the Bills and the Cowboys. And he retired and launched Doubleback in 2007. So he, I think had seen what his hometown was going through in this little bit of a wine renaissance and change, and wanted to be a part of that. And he had, now he grew up, he didn't have a lot of money, and being in the NFL, he got exposed to great wine and decided to venture into that. And I remember, I'm younger than Drew is, so I was kind of the kid that, lived vicariously through his NFL career. And, Drew was the kind of the mythical godlike figure that every young boy aspired to be. But I remember, I was a young wine nerd now. And when Drew announced that he was going to start a wine project here, I remember the first, knee-jerk reaction was, well, that's great. He's really good at football, seems like a great guy, but what the hell does he know about making wine? And, you'd seen all these celebrity athlete type projects, and none of them at the time were really any good. They were all, what I've always said, kind of treated like a Nike shoe endorsement, slap your name on the bottle, find some mediocre juice and just try to sell a bunch of it because of who you are. But Drew came out and he wanted to do everything the right way. He wanted to grow a business. He wanted to make great wine. And, the first thing he did was buy a piece of bare property and then develop that into an estate vineyard. So he did things the right way. The first vintage was a Wine Spectator Top 100 Wine of the World. And we've just had a lot of great success after that. I think because of that, it was something that I was pretty happy to be involved with. I think if it had been just a typical celebrity athlete brand, I wouldn't have lasted very long.
That's a great story about, I guess, not both of you coming back, but did you leave the Valley prior to joining up with Drew and then come back as well to start making wine there? Or where did your journey take you?
Yeah, so I had a weird way of getting into wine. I actually started my winery when I was in high school here. And my mom, I think, would have preferred any other industry outside of alcohol when I was 16 years old. So I did that. And it was, quite frankly, just wanted to try it as a way to make money. I didn't know much about wine when I was that young and didn't come from a wine family. And, pretty soon found out that I was pretty good at it. And then it started to really enjoy wine later and did pretty well with that. And at the same time, I was working at Leonetti Cellar, who basically was kind of the founding father of Washington wine, on the high end. And just worked my way up from there. That's where Drew and I met. I went down. I worked in Argentina in 2010. I worked for Paul Hobbs down there at Viña Cobos, and I think that was really what solidified me knowing that I wanted to be in Walla Walla and wanted to make a career there. Growing up there, as a kid before I got into wine, it was it's a small town. You want to get the hell out of there and go to Stanford Business School or do whatever you can to get out of the small town. And then I think getting into the wine industry and becoming older, you realize how lucky you are to live where you live. And just the wine scene was incredible. I remember thinking, trying to prove it, is it as good as everyone here says it is, And so, you're researching articles. And I remember, one of the things at the time was, I remember for a few years there was around 10% of Spectator's top 100 list was always, Washington or very close. And that was kind of like to me now, maybe that doesn't matter that much. But back then, when I was younger, it was a good kind of a litmus test to know that this was truly a world-class wine region where there was a lot of opportunity because it was young. And so, made that commitment and, took the deep dive with Drew and it's been a really successful run so far.
Awesome. Well, first, I should just have a small little personal question about your internship or working at Harvest in Argentina. What was that like? Was there, I worked one vintage a long time ago and I picked Australia because I needed to go Southern Hemisphere, but I'm not good enough at Spanish. I was worried I was going to dump something in the wrong tank. Did you have any of those issues or how was it? Was it a good time?
It was definitely a good time. It was great, Argentina, beautiful place. People were awesome. It was great because I was in college and didn't have any money. So it was, you could live like a king down there. But it was, I had taken 4 years of Spanish. So I was pretty good with Spanish. But what threw me off really was, everything's in liters or, it's not bricks, it's Beaume and just and Celsius, those things really threw me off for a while. And then also it's just the nomenclature, we'll call a tank door, a door, and they'll say the mouth. And so I remember the first few times you're like, the fuck are they talking about the mouth of the what is going on? And so there's just some of those kind of, interesting moments, but also because, I lived with two guys from Spain. One was actually the winemaker at Alto Bodega, really fun guys, but we went out tasting one weekend and there's guard shacks at every winery. And we were leaving this, I don't remember where we were, but really beautiful winery. We stopped and asked the guard for directions to wherever we were going. And I quickly realized I couldn't understand what he was saying for whatever reason. And so my Spanish roommate kind of took over and they talked for a little bit and then we moved on. And as soon as we moved on, I asked him, I was like, what the heck did he just say? And my Spanish roommate looked at me and goes, I have no idea. I was like, thank God it's not just me. So there's definitely some of that conjugation type of things and just nomenclature too that you get into that's challenging, but kind of fun at the same time.
When you come back up and you fast forward to 2007, what does it mean now to be making estate Cabernet? And you threw out a word earlier of high-end Cabernet or high-end wines. Did Drew think about the project from the beginning as an aspirational project? We're going to make a luxury wine. It's going to be high-end. We want it to compete with, cult wines from Napa. And, I know that the style maybe leans more old world and even start to compete with, French Cabernet. What does that look like for you guys? Do you think about the projects in that way?
Yeah, for sure. Drew, I think one of the reasons that we've gotten along so well is, he retired from the NFL when he was 37 years old or something. And I don't think you can, number one, get to the NFL without being extremely competitive. And then two, who gets, it's hard to be that way and then retire at that age. And then myself, I think I was so young, almost insecure about it. Just had a big chip on my shoulder, wanted to kick everyone's ass and prove myself. And so I think the two of us, because of that, we're just ultra competitive. And yeah, we definitely saw it that way, that, we don't want to be the best Cabernet in Walla Walla. We don't want to be the best Cabernet in America. We want to be the best Cabernet in the world. And, we've always had that mentality of, shoot for the stars and see where you land. But also just like constant improvement. There's no bigger critic of what we do than ourselves. And, and saying you want to be the best is an easy thing to say. And also, an ambiguous thing to say. What does that actually mean? And so, yeah, we've definitely thought about it that way from the very beginning, and still think about it that way to this day.
How does Washington and its climate position itself well to make that Cabernet? As we're thinking about the world's great Cabernets, and like Bordeaux, for example, there's so much vintage variation. For Napa, they make a certain style. What makes Walla Walla, a perfect place between terroir and climate?
Yeah, it's funny. We're if you look at the latitude of the earth, we're about almost equidistant between Bordeaux and Burgundy. So much higher north, obviously, than Napa, which I think is actually like southern Italy if you overlay the map. So we have that similar type growing season that Bordeaux does. But like you alluded to, the vintage variation that Bordeaux gets, obviously, they're right there on pretty damn close to the coastline. Was basically a former swamp, and one of my favorite wine regions in the world. But Washington has that similar kind of like a graph curve of a growing season, but we have, like we talked about earlier, the Cascade Mountain Range that really acts as a buffer to that vintage variation. So we have irrigation that we use in our vineyards because we don't get that much water like Bordeaux does, where a lot of that's dry farmed. And so we can really control things a little bit better. We get the heat because of that also, not quite as much as Napa, but it's still a little bit warmer than Bordeaux. But we also cool down at night. And we have these vintages where I think like one of the biggest things that we get, so that at the peak of the summer, we have an hour extra sunlight during the day than Napa does. We get, at the peak of summer. So that allows us to catch up and get ripe. But what I really enjoy is during the fall, when those sunlight hours really start to fall off, we don't get overripe. So like, I always feel like we get what I would say is like ripe with numbers. So, you can get sugar accumulation, you get really great acid retention, and then you can kind of just wait for flavor to get ripe without going crazy on acids and sugars. And I've really enjoyed that about Washington. So a lot of people say, we get the fruit of the new world, but we get the structure of the old world. And generally speaking, I'd say that's like a pretty decent way to explain it to people.
It's cool. I'm almost thinking about it like those early nights of the cooler fall than the Napa when it starts getting dark earlier. It's almost like a cold soak where you're like, you're keeping it in there, maybe extracting some flavor without having to ramp up with like the heat and the alcohol.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, yeah, it's like a wine nerd analogy there. That makes a ton of sense. I didn't actually think about the latitude in relation to the hours of sunlight when you want it. I think that's a really interesting point there. And also being able to obviously control the water. And I think also a good point is the lack of moisture in the desert kind of like climate helps with any disease pressure too. So you guys are perfectly positioned to not have to use a ton of chemicals or worry about a lot of mildew and stuff like that as well. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's very dry. So, from that perspective, it's a lot easier to farm organically and do things the right way and be really soft on your farming techniques. Back to the ripening thing, I feel like, especially in these hot vintages that we've seen, a lot of times I feel like people like in Napa or these really warm climates are picking because they're not, their sugars are, 30 bricks. And then, so they're picking because of numbers rather than flavors. And then they're just making adjustments in tank where, I think we can pick at more balanced numbers and not have to make those adjustments.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And for our listeners, just so the general rule of thumb is as sugar increases in the grape, the percentage of sugar acids tend to go down in a correlated manner. It's not 1-to-1, but it's close. And then bricks are basically, what would you say? It's a little over 2 bricks % of alcohol in the final wine. Is that right? So it's like 2.3 or something.
Yeah, pretty close. There's a little fluctuation there, but yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And I think, and then the phenolic ripeness is the skins and the flavors rather than just pure, how much alcohol can we get out of these grapes? Do they, heat up enough? So that's really interesting.
That definitely leads into a conversation maybe about how you've seen that climate change over the last 20, 25 years that you've been, thinking critically about wine. Have you seen those changes, and what kind of strategies or tactics have you guys been implementing to make adjustments if you've needed to? And, maybe say a little bit more about sustainability, which I know is certainly top of mind when you're thinking about making, a high quality intentional product.
Yeah, for sure. We've seen obviously, really warm vintages over the last few years. And the weird thing too is in the last a little over a decade, we've had 2 of the warmest vintages on record, but also the coldest vintage on record. So that's always a weird thing to think about. But in the frame of all of this, especially over the last 7 years, we've seen very warm vintages. And the macro level details that we've noticed, like in 2020, was wildfire. I mean, the smoke that was, in 2017 was the first time that I'd gotten nervous from wildfire smoke. And then in 2020, it was really the first time that we actually saw something happen, particularly in the Willamette Valley, where we actually dumped that entire vintage off because of smoke taint. So those things are obviously happening and extremely frustrating and disconcerting, and another set of issues that we have to deal with Mother Nature and farming. The other part of that is it feels like it's gotten more extreme to me, where we've also had crazy hot days, and record temperatures, but we've also had like crazy cold days in the winter, and we've had frost issues in the fall and also in the spring. So it's changing, and it just seems like it's been more extreme. One, a geology professor here at Whitman College, who's really involved in the wine industry, has a ton of weather stations all over the state, and mostly in Walla Walla. And he said that it's not necessarily the highs of the temperature highs of the day that have changed. It's mostly the lows. And obviously that affects, how the vine grows also. So we've seen that gradual increase, but it's been super interesting. I know, Billy, you're in Bordeaux. It's been super interesting to see, a place like that is so traditional and so engrossed in certain things, and by law, in varietals, to adopt new varietals to deal with climate change. But in terms of Walla Walla, like we mentioned earlier, we're still quite a bit cooler than Napa is, even though we're warmer than Bordeaux. So, we do have space in terms of heat to grow into that a little bit, which I'm happy about. But obviously, when we're planting vineyards that are 30, 40, 50 years in mind, we're making sure that we're planting, varietals in the right places, planting Cabernet on the warmer sites because it's a later ripening varietal, and planting Merlot on the cooler sites because it's an early, pragmatic approaches like that. And, we can talk about, other things also.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about climate change in the way that it affects farming. Isn't global warming in every region, right? It's really a temperature extremes. So I think calling out that you're seeing more cooling and earlier frost, maybe more intense frost, these kinds of things, I think that really provides a lot of context for folks. And it's something that we've mentioned, I think, talking with several producers. I mean, the sentiment is so widespread that, and those changes are so evident. It's just interesting to hear how folks are adjusting. And like you said, depending on the region that you're in, there are things that you can and can't do, but you guys have obviously a little bit more flexibility, right, than Bordeaux.
Yeah. And it's been super frustrating because you don't know what to expect. From a business perspective, that's obviously challenging to plan for.
That's really interesting, Josh. I want to pivot a little bit from talking about the process and zoom out maybe and think about just the projects that you guys are working on right now. And certainly want to touch on a new project that you guys have starting up in the Willamette Valley, a Pinot Noir project, and just want to hear kind of how you split your time and where you see your focus lying over the next couple of years. And then even more so, what do you see for the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, for sure. It's been extremely exciting, number one, to go down into Willamette and start making wine. We've been doing it for about 4 years now, which is crazy to think about. This will be our third release year, and it's just been great. Long time, Willamette, my wife and I would go when we were in college. Drew's wife, she's from like Oswego, so very close to the Willamette Valley. They've enjoyed going down there a lot. And it's just been a ton of fun because we used to go down there to kind of enjoy wine country, but not know as many people. So we could kind of get lost down there. And, we just fell in love with the wines, and the region is so beautiful. And so we started making wine in 2018 for the first, technically 2017. We actually made a vintage in 2017 and sold it under a different label as a secret just to see how it went. And to back up a little bit more, I actually made Willamette Valley Pinot Noir from 2011 on while I was with the Figgins family.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so we kind of basically how we approached it is being fans of the region. We just looked at the region and what wines we liked the best. Just very simple, very selfish, but also, very authentic. And we've always kind of made wines that we truly enjoy and never have tried to like pander to critics or a certain style. We've always just tried to make wines that we really love. And that's how we approached Willamette is what's your favorite producers? What are your favorite single vineyard wines? We kind of made a list, and then we looked at that and boiled it down to a couple of regions. And, one was Ribbon Ridge, which is actually, the smallest AVA in Oregon, tiny little area. We found a couple of great vineyards up there. One was actually planted in 1982, which is super fun to work with. And then the Eola Amity Hills was the other one. And just two, great wine regions within the Willamette Valley that we started making wine from. And the first, two releases now have sold out within, like 48 hours and have a waiting list. And it's just been extremely fun. And last year, at the end of the year, we closed on our first piece of property down there, which is in the Eola Amity Hills, which is kind of like, it's funny. Willamette Valley is very long, but I always think of Eola Amity as kind of the southern tip of the Willamette Valley when it's really almost like the central part of the Willamette Valley. But the wines down there, from what I've seen, are really they remind me a lot of our McQueen vineyard here in Walla Walla, where it's almost like, I hate to make this comparison because this is a bit of a stretch, but hopefully I can illustrate it the right way. But it's almost like Barolo in a sense, where there's this little bit of great, tannin structures, great acid, but they're put together in a very elegant way. And that's what really reminds me. It reminds me of that at our McQueen vineyard with Cabernet. And then this site really reminds me of that with Pinot Noir. And just these elegant wines that have tannin and they have acid, and they're just really, really unique and really cool. And so it's an 80-acre piece of property. It was planted originally in 2008 by Mimi Castile, who's this enormous figurehead of regenerative farming and building these really cool ecosystems of sustainability and plants and biodiversity and farm animals and all of the above and no-till farming, all of that. She started this project herself. And we weren't necessarily serious about buying something, but this came up through conversation that she might be interested, and it wasn't for sale or anything. And so we just reached out, and it worked out really well. We hit it off with Mimi. She's a really cool person, a great family, and everything just kind of checked the box for us. It's a beautiful property. It's got a house on the property that we'd love to turn into a tasting room someday. The vineyard itself, like if you're trying to create kind of like a Grand Cru bottling, the vineyard has, multiple clones of Pinot Noir across different soil types, across different aspects to the sun and elevation changes. And it's just this extremely, extremely cool property that we just fell in love with and couldn't pass it up on. And so we took it down and made a deal. And then, this year will be the first time that we get to farm it ourselves and really take a deep dive into what it really looks like through the lens of the wine. But we did I secured a few blocks last year, middle of the year, and made wine, and man, the wines are beautiful. It's really what we thought it was so far, and just really excited to really fine tune that. So yeah, the Willamette Valley, I'm going down there tomorrow for a couple of days to work with our team. And I love going down there, and more and more excited every day about that new project, the Bledsoe McDaniels label.
How different Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noir are, and what it's like to be making wines kind of with a similar ethos, right? In terms of the quality that you want to produce, but in very different regions with obviously very different varietals and characteristics of those varietals. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a great question, and one we get a lot is, clearly they're different, and clearly the valleys are different. Walla Walla is hot and dry, Willamette is cooler and a little bit wetter, and obviously Pinot Noir is it's light colored, and people don't talk about it like they do with these dark big Cabernets. But what I've always felt like is it's almost more of like a cultural difference in Bordeaux and Burgundy than it is maybe in reality, because I've always felt Cabernet really shows off terroir really well. It's just not as obvious sometimes up front. And Pinot Noir does it, maybe better than anything else. And so I think the leap wasn't as big as I thought it might be to make. But at the same time, I think in making Pinot Noir, because of the way it is, because it's, very transparent, because it's fickle and can show faults so easily, I think it's actually made me a better winemaker with Cabernet at the same time. And so the balance of that and the positive aspects of that, relationship also have been more than I expected. And it's been, intellectually just extremely fun, and, compartmentalize things and then, and don't compartmentalize things and to try to think outside the box and constantly, push yourself and how you can get better and what are you doing wrong and how am I not understanding this, and, talking to other winemakers and tasting other wines. And I think it's just been doing both has been extremely, intellectually fun. If I'm just being kind of brutally honest, it's been really cool.
Pinot Noir definitely asks you to be more precise, maybe in moments that Cabernet just isn't going to. So I'm sure that provides a lot of opportunity to learn and grow as you're going kind of back and forth between the two.
Yeah, it's funny. Here we are. We actually bring all the Pinot Noir in a refrigerated truck to Walla Walla to make the wine. I just trust my team here so much that I like having it here. And it actually, I think it maybe is better for the fruit because, within, 7 hours of the fruit being picked, it's chilled down to 45 degrees and we're sorting it on the sorting table. But
that's awesome.
It's really funny in the tank room when you're sitting there and you're beating the shit out of Cabernet and beating it up, and then you're treating the Pinot Noir like with white glove service. It's just a really funny left brain right brain kind of thing and exercise.
Yeah, when you think about these projects in two different regions, obviously we're an investment firm and we talk to a lot of collectors and we deal with a lot of cult labels. Do you have that aspiration for these wines of, we want to produce wines that are coveted, that are being cellared for a long time, that are being traded actively by folks? Or does that not really come into calculation when you're thinking about what the projects look like 5, 10, and 15 years down the line?
I think we definitely want to make wines that are, special wines that will cellar for a long time. But at the same time, we definitely also want people to enjoy these wines. And what we've always said with Bledsoe McDaniels is we're really trying to replicate Doubleback, but doing it with Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley. And I think that, Doubleback's been extremely successful and pretty highly sought after. And But at the same time, I've always told our customers, because I get asked all the time, when should I drink this, or should I drink it, or should I just keep it away? It's like there's never a bad time to open a great bottle of wine, and who am I to tell you to do it or not do it? Because if like at the end of the day, like our core purpose for our business is to create genuine happiness for our customers and ourselves, and we do that. One of the ways we do that is through these bottles of wine. And so if opening a bottle of Doubleback prematurely makes your life better, then that's really great for us. And we appreciate that and totally support it.
That makes sense. Are they only available allocation only right now? Or do you guys distribute out into stores at all or restaurants?
Doubleback is about 20% distribution through mostly domestically with a few international markets. And then, so mostly allocated through our mailing list. And then right now, Bledsoe McDaniels is completely allocated with a waiting list. So it's, just taking time to make a little bit more wine, and there's been a lot of demand for it.
Awesome. One thing I wanted to circle back on, the Cabernet and terroir notion. I think that's something that's interesting to dive into, because talking to winemakers in Bordeaux or Chateau, they're going to tout that all day long, and there's so many regions here that are there that are like right next to each other that they'll claim they're night and day. Just the different terraces of the soils and the pebbles. You guys are doing single vineyard Cabernets at Doubleback, aren't you? Can you describe? It's so interesting that you described one as a Barolo-esque style. Is that just kind of higher tannin and acid, but like more I guess lighter on the palate, as opposed to something that might be like bigger and brawny and maybe less elegant? Can you just describe like the differences in what you've been seeing in terroir and expressing Cabernet?
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because I think like the market always sees the chateau, right? So like in Bordeaux, you only talk about the chateau, whereas in Burgundy, you're talking about the vineyard. And it's funny that way, that I think that's why like the stigma is attached that Cabernet doesn't show off terroir, because I totally think that's the case. I mean, like our McQueen vineyard is on the same hillside as our Bob Healy vineyard. So, they're a quarter mile away, and we pick McQueen Cabernet about 6 weeks after we pick Bob Healy Cabernet, and they're totally different wines.
Wow.
And then Cabernet from our Rocks District vineyard, Lafort, is a totally different wine. And then Cabernet out Mill Creek and Cabernet at the estate here at the winery, they're just totally different. But I think like it's just like I feel like it's just a cultural thing that people don't think that way, probably because of the roots of Bordeaux. They think about the chateau. But I mean, think about the difference in Pauillac and Margaux. They're totally different wines. And so, yeah, I think I'm a huge believer and always have been that Cabernet shows off terroir really well. And it just isn't talked about as much as like Pinot Noir or Syrah is.
Yeah, no, and I hadn't really, I'd thought about it before as well, but talking to producers while you're here and tasting wines, there's the wines initially are separated by region, and then you go and taste within the region and you get back into the chateau. But since we only know like but the top 5 first growth kind of are lumped together, people forget that they're, from 3 different, general areas, or I guess 2, but still the difference, to your point, between like a Pauillac to a Margaux to like a Pessac, Leonin, they're very noticeable. I think that's something people should really kind of explore a little bit more.
And I think you're in Saint Emilion right now. That's a good example too, like on the right bank, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a fairly large region, and some of the best producers have the best ground, and the wines are just totally different from a lot of the wine that's actually made in Saint Emilion.
Cheval Blanc, for example, you can, if you go a quarter mile, half mile one direction, you're in Pomerol and you're basically near Petrus, but the wines are completely different. It's
exactly.
It's kind of interesting. Those are Merlot, some, but I think it's really, really interesting to think about. And then the other piece I was going to ask about is just kind of like a popular culture type thing. I ran into, it was a friend of a friend this week, and he was back on, he's a little older than me. He was just starting to drink wine when Sideways came out, and he grew up in Santa Barbara. And he's like, I grew up in Santa Ynez. I refuse to drink Merlot. And I was like, what? You'll never drink Merlot? And he was like, no. So do you see any trends? There are people like calling for, Cabernet's always been hot. There's Pinot Noir. Are there any other varietals that you've been hearing, or is that one of the reasons you guys are into Pinot, or is it just one of your fancies? Is that something you're just into?
Yeah, I mean, like, we never want to chase a trend for sure. It's not why we got but man, if Merlot was the trend, I would love that. I've always, I grew up making Merlot at Leonetti. We make, 600 cases of Merlot here at Doubleback. I've always felt like that was such, back to the vineyard and the terroir thing. The problem with Merlot was there was a lot of Merlot grown in really shitty places and it got a bad rap. We just talked about Petrus and Cheval Blanc. I mean, two of the greatest wines in the world, which are Petrus is all Merlot and Cheval Blanc's mostly Merlot. So if Merlot came back, I would love that because Merlot, even in Walla Walla, I don't like Merlot grown on the west side of the valley, but I love it grown on the east side of the valley. It's a little cooler, heavier clay content soils, and they're just these like Cabernet's little brother kind of. It's furry and just incredible mid-palate wines with crazy fruit, and they're just beautiful wines. So if you guys make it over here, I'd love to taste you through Merlot because I think it's totally underrated and has gotten a bad rap, and hopefully my generation can bring that back. I would love it.
Yeah, I'll be right there with you. Some of the best wines I've ever had were a Merlot. When I was working in Australia, my boss gave me a 15-year-old or 20-year-old Merlot that he just didn't want anymore because he only drank Shiraz. And I opened it with some buddies, and it was by far one of the best. It was so the depth of complexity, the richness was still there. It was full of cocoa, and the mouthfeel was like a theory. It was it's still one of my favorite wines of all time. And circling back to my acquaintance's comment, he also mentioned he doesn't like Chianti, but he loves Sangiovese. So I think he might have had some Merlots that he just didn't know were Merlots that he liked. So
totally, exactly. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Josh, is there, just in terms of thinking about our listeners and anything that you want to share, about what you guys are working on that you want to kind of leave people with? How, you kind of noted that there's a waiting list for some of your wines, and, how can we acquire?
Yeah, totally. The best way to reach out is just info@doubleback.com. That'll pop you right into our team, and you can inquire about any of the wines through that. And we'll get you set up in the right place. But yeah, BledsoeWineEstates.com is where all three of our wineries are listed. And, we actually yesterday launched tastings for the first time down on our Willamette property. And we're booked now through July. The best thing that I would always tell people is we would love to have you be here because it's the coolest way to experience the wine and go home with a story and a memory that's attached to the wine. And, to be honest, we like to meet people too. We like to meet people that are supporting us and, share some great stories. So, we would love to just have people, our team's really good at pointing you in the right direction, whether it's hotels or airports or restaurants or, other things to do or our friends that are making wine in these places too. So, reach out and come visit us. We would love that.
Thanks a lot. I think that had a really great conversation, shared a lot of really interesting things, and just congratulations on success that you guys have seen, and even just getting to be a part of so many projects that you're excited about and feel like you're really doing your best work. That's an exciting place to be.
Yeah. And when you guys are down at your vineyard this time, that you should visit, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a waterfall down there. I highly recommend it. Aola Amity is high on my list, so we went down a couple of years ago and tasted there, and then we went and walked around the waterfall because my girlfriend was into those, and it was really pretty. So you should check it out.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. But yeah, thanks to both of you for having me. This is it's been super fun, and it's also been cool to get to know your business a little bit. Billy, I'm a little jealous that you're in Bordeaux right now, but I hope you guys make it out here and come see us, and we can do this in person.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Good.
You have a good rest of the week.
Thanks, you guys. Cheers.
All right. Bye now.
Cheers. Bye.
For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vent podcast, please email us at support@vent.co. To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vent platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.